I'm a girl with the Go Gators.
Okay. I was just checking to see if you were listening.
Pedestrian, Louisiana. Hold on a second.
Hey, guys! Hey! I'm having a press conference, okay? Thank you.
Momentum, excitement, energy. They say all this stuff, and you know what they mean, but it doesn't describe what you mean. It's just sort of out there.
You got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
I was just worried about, listening to, all your guys' rap poison.
Welcome to Sideline Judgement. Here are your hosts, Sergio and Tyler.
Welcome back to Sideline Judgement. My name is Sergio.
My name is Tyler.
Tyler, you sound so clear.
Well, Sergio, that's because with a new year and a new season comes the need for a new mic and my first ever pop filter. So...
Look at this. Look at this. Welcome. I'm very glad to welcome you to the family of nicer microphones. This our 7th season together, Tyler. Look at that.
Oh, wow. This is
7 years.
This is my equivalent of the black uniforms is a pop filter.
Oh, boo.
I waited to talk about it. We've
45 seconds into this podcast, and we've already
listeners. We have been talking for like 20 minutes about what we were going to do in this podcast, and I neglected to bring up that I would mention the black uniforms for this moment, for it to be captured live on air.
Well, that is something we can talk about next week, Tyler, when we preview every conference in college football. Which these days I don't know who's where, but in order for us to have that episode next week, we needed a little bit of a primer, right? This summer has been absolutely insane in terms of conference realignment. We thought last summer with Red River was crazy. We thought a few months later with USC and UCLA was crazy. Well, the Pac-12 seems to be on its deathbed. It has just been moved into hospice. I would like to start this conversation, Tyler, of what you have coined as collegiate gerrymandering, which I love. Yep. Title of this episode. Tyler, we're going to go conference by conference. We're just going to talk about the conferences and the realignments, and we have to start with the Pac-12. You, Tyler, even though you live in a Big Ten town, you you are in the state of California, which is for the next maybe 10 months, Pac-12 country. Let's talk about the Pac-12. So for those who aren't aware, conference realignment really kicked off with Oklahoma and Texas in the summer of 2021, the Red River rivalry, declaring that they were leaving the Big 12 and joining the SEC, where, as they like to say, quote, just means more. After that, there was kind of a scramble, and oh my gosh, the Big 12 is going to die, and all these things. They're losing their big brands. Well, the Big 12 re-upped, and they were able to add 4 different teams, 3 from the American Conference, that is Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, and BYU, who was formerly an independent and joined a conference. Take notes, Notre Dame. So they are joining the Big 12 for this season. And so for this year, the Big 12 will have 14 teams. It'll be those 4 brand new schools that are joining and beginning Big 12 conference play this season, in addition to Oklahoma and Texas, who will be having their swan song in the Big 12 before leaving for the SEC. What does this have to do with the Pac-12, you ask? Great question, Tyler. Well, the next step in realignment in this timeline was USC and UCLA declaring that they were going to leave the Pac-12 for the Big Ten. So the Big Ten added the 2 LA schools, and that left the Pac-12 with, I believe it was 8 teams at that point, correct? I'm bugging. I need to do math.
No, 10 teams because
10 teams.
It was the Pac.
That's right, because they were 12.
By the way, the other theme of everything we're about to talk about for this next hour is that if I had a time machine, the one thing I would do is go back in time and tell these people that name these conferences to not name them based off the number of schools that are in their conference.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you know what?
Continue.
That's something that the SEC, the ACC, the American, and basically every conference that's not the Big 12, the Big 10, and the Pac-12, essentially, they got that one right. So they have 10 teams. Well, it all went dormant. We had the 2022 college football season, and now as we enter the 2023 college football season, First, we got word that Colorado, with Deion Sanders as head coach, said that they were going to be leaving for the Big 12. So then the Big 12 added Colorado. We're then left with 9 teams. And then within a couple of weeks, Tyler, we had basically a mad scramble for who is going to end up where. And now officially, we have news that Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah will be joining Colorado and leaving for the Big 12, in addition to Oregon and Washington joining the Los Angeles schools, USC and UCLA, in leaving for the Big 10. So what started off in a conference with 12 teams now consist after going into the 2024 season, I should say, will now consist of only 4 teams: Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. Tyler, we aside from like sending text messages of like, did you see this news, and links on Twitter, we haven't really had a conversation off air about this. So I would like to ask you, Tyler, to start. What does this whole realignment news, and specifically the essential death of the Pac-12, mean to you? And as someone who lives out in the West Coast, in California, and specifically in Los Angeles, what's the vibe out there in terms of, do people care that the Pac-12 is dying out there? Because if this was happening on the East Coast and it was the SEC or the ACC, we'd have buildings burning. And you know that very well.
Yeah, so this is I will say right there, that was Los Angeles. As a Los Angeles resident, California citizen, and a member of the film industry, this is so not on people's radar in any way whatsoever, and that's kind of sad. I personally think this is all a conspiracy theory to punish Oregon State for being too good last year. They said, "Oh, you won the division? No more. Pac-12's dead now."
This is anti-Jonathan Smith bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Truly, though, what makes me sad about this is that this is really marking, and it's people might think of it more in terms of the other schools, but truly, I think it's the Pac-12 is showing like this is the death of regional rivalries to me. Like maybe not in the SEC and like out east, but I always had this opinion that the Pac-12 I thought would always exist because in some form or another, because these schools existed and they have to have a conference because they're out here.
And these programs are already like functioning programs. It's not like they're small time programs.
To get off the ground. Right. Like Oregon and Washington are going to have football teams, and so they've got to have a group to play them with. I always thought that in some form or another, the Pac-12 would exist. And maybe that's the problem that Larry Scott had, is that he thought, well, we always have to we're going to have to exist. So we don't necessarily need to do all these things. And the complacency is maybe what killed the Pac-12, because in a lot of ways, this could be good for the viewership of Pac-12 schools, because I mean, football out here, especially at the college level, is really only for diehards and for those people that are fans of their teams. This could get them on a more national stage, which is crazy to say about USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington, but it's true. Yeah. And not having to be shackled to the Pac-12's god awful media rights deal.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you mentioned Larry Scott, because for those who don't know, Larry Scott is the former commissioner of the Pac-12. And all of those jokes we've been making the past 6-7 years about the Pac-12 network and the fact that I, a resident of South Florida, have access to the Pac-12, and Tyler, a resident of Los Angeles, does not have access to the Pac-12, I think is indicative of the failings that Larry Scott had. There was a moment with TV rights deals in the early 2010s where instead of partnering with a major cable company, for example, the SEC partnered with ESPN to create the SEC network. The ACC partnered with ESPN to create the ACC network. The Big Ten partnered with Fox to create the Big Ten network. Those branded names as conference name and then network, those are owned and operated by the major television companies. So Fox owns and operates the Big Ten network. ESPN or Disney owns and operates the SEC and the ACC network. What those conferences did was they sold off their rights and the inventory that they provide those cable companies so that they can have things to show, and then in turn they brand them on a specific channel catering towards fans of those specific conferences and those specific schools within those conferences. What Larry Scott did was say, we're going to cut out the cable company and we're going to be our own cable. We're going to cut out the television channels and television networks. We're going to be our own television network. And it's not just the Pac-12 network, Tyler. It's the Pac-12 networks. There's supposed to be 7, 8, 9, 10 different networks and such. But come to find out that, Tyler, not just people on the West Coast, but people don't really care for Olympic water polo like they do an SEC, I won't say SEC, but a college football game. And so obviously I had a very tough time getting on cable companies such as, Comcast and DirecTV and major companies at the time that were really the forefront of providing this television. And so they were burning money. They had this brand new, beautiful office space in San Francisco, burning money. They were essentially not being responsible. And on top of that, because they were burning money and such, and because, I hate to say it, but because USC was really taking a downturn in that time, apart from Oregon with a few years with Chip Kelly and Mariota, and then Washington with their run with Peterson, 2 good years.
2-3 good years.
There was no big fish in the Pac-12 pond. It was just a lot of mediocre teams nationally. Next week, we will talk about how this season in 2023, the Pac-12 is going to be very competitive on the field, and we're very excited to talk about that next week. But looking at the reasons why it happened, why the Pac-12 was in such a situation, they just couldn't compete. And Tyler, why did these programs like the LA schools, Oregon and Washington, the Arizonas, Colorado, Utah, why did those schools all choose to go to different conferences that are much further away traditionally, and their opponents are, than staying together? It's because of TV money, right?
Yeah, money.
Because the Pac-12 shot themselves in the foot, they drove their value down, and they realized, those big programs realized, we can't compete nationally if we're making 40, 35% annually than what an SEC school or a Big Ten school is making.
Yeah. So in some ways, for like the quality, for like the good of these programs, I that's the tough thing. I don't blame the programs for making the moves that they did. Like, because if you look at the situations that they are in, it doesn't really make sense for them to do anything else. Like, they can make more money, be more nationally relevant, and compete at a higher level on a bigger stage. And I don't see, for them, I don't really think that there is a downside off the top of head. But I think it does, like, it's bad for college football the way we knew it, is I think the problem. Because again, like, yeah, Oregon and Washington will still be able to keep their rivalry. It was like, is Oregon State going to be a thing? Or is Washington State going to be a thing anymore? And now we talk about what was it? It was like those 4 teams that are still just left stranded: Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. Storied programs, important to college football, and in the history of it. What are they going to do? They're just kind of left out in the cold, and it's just, it's all mismanagement from the Pac-12, but it then has killed a lot of like the regional rivalry. And I think it's because the money of the sport wants this to become like the NFL.
Right. Exactly.
Which,
we're moving towards that, like, NFL structure. Right. And the reason that these teams are leaving now is because the media rights deal that was signed in 2013, 2014, whatever, that's expiring after this 2023 season. So this is really the swan song season of the Pac-12 as we know it. And then 2/3 of the league are leaving to other conferences. And as of right now, we don't know what's going to happen with what people are dubbing the Pac-4, right? Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. So we'll see where that goes. We'll see what happens there. But I do want to say quickly before we move on, Tyler, that I will say I do think there is a downside. And it's not football related. It's all the other sports.
That's true.
It's the travel. It's the expectations on all those other student athletes. And honestly, it kind of sucks for these kids that, like, I know personally. Kevin Borba is a good friend of mine. He is the Pac-12 reporter for Athlon Sports. He covers Colorado in the Pac-12. He covers Stanford in the Pac-12. He has personally spoken to collegiate athletes at university, at some of these Pac-12 schools that have gone and declared they're going to go somewhere to a different conference and said, hey, I chose this school because I was close to home, because my parents could come see me, because it wasn't a crazy amount of travel. It was going up for a few hours and then being able to come back and sleep in my own bed at night. You know what I mean? And now they're not going to be able to do that in different time zones and such. And I don't know. I think we're looking at, and in addition to the loss of that regionalism that you're saying, like, if we really want college football to succeed nationally, we have to make sure we're including every aspect of the sport, but we need to like make sure that we are preserving the regional identity of each area while elevating it to be a part of this fabric, this beautiful quilt that is national college football. If all of it is just SEC and Big Ten, like people speculate in 15 years, we're just going to literally have 2 leagues, then that's not really a unique quilty fabric of college football. That's just 2 conglomerates that have absorbed everyone else. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing, is that like I think it's a mistake for college football, and like this is all in kind of air quotes, college football, to move towards trying to be like the NFL and trying to because if you really just want to be like, oh, the best of the best always all the time, it's really just about the best of the best. And I'm like, well, we have that already. We have NFL football.
Right.
It's just like college football succeeds for other reasons, for the pageantry, for the rivalry, for the school, like the school loyalty, the memories associated with it, the fun aspect, the amateur aspect of it. And like not to say like against like, and when I say amateur aspect, I don't mean like the NIL related stuff, but I mean like the less good players, like the younger players, the experimental like football, things like that, because football is a trickle up sport. It's where things, the types of players and the types of systems that come from the sport are all based off what goes from high school and then to college and then to the NFL. It doesn't get renovated at the top, it gets renovated at the bottom. And this is it. I don't know. It's just, I think in the immediate, it might seem good for the sport from a money and views perspective, but I think it will in the long term really affect how we view the sport. I mean,
no, I completely agree. I completely agree.
It's disappointing. It's disappointing.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I completely agree, Tyler. So yeah, like we said, this is the last year of the Pac-12 as we know it. So we'll talk about that next week in terms of what we're excited about, what teams we like. I also hate, Tyler, before we move on, but like we're recording this on August 16th, and this entire summer has been dominated by stuff that is not football. Like we have football things that we need to talk about. I want to talk about Bo Nix at Oregon. I want to talk about if Alex Grinch is going to be able to be successful defensively and deliver a playoff appearance in the final year of the 4-team playoff at USC. I want to talk about DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon State and Jonathan Smith and how they can build off of a successful season last year. I want to talk about Stanford and how they hired an FCS coach from nearby in the North Bay, and if that's going to be able to work and how good they're doing in recruiting. There's so many things I actually want to talk about that are football related, and yet we are sitting here on August 16th, 2 weeks essentially before the beginning of the college football season, and we're not even remotely talking about football. And that to me is just very disappointing. I know my tone rose in that one because I did really get under my skin there, but alas,
it gets under my skin too. I mean, like the Pac-12 is genuinely interesting this year, and it's not just them. It's all.
This might be the most competitive conference in the country this year. Seriously,
I think it will be. Like I don't even think that is like hyperbole to say. I think there are more teams that can win this conference in the Pac-12 than in any other conference. Like
there is a realistic path for Oregon State to make the college football playoff, and it is a shame that they are one of the 4 schools that this entire season they're going to have that nasty, ugly, gray, rainy cloud over their head like they're Linus from Peanuts, and it's going to be completely overshadowed by a potential 10 to 11 win season. So, all right. Anyway, let's move forward from the Pac-12.
Yeah.
One conference that is also going to be a lot of fun this season is the Big 12. Before actually, I did mention that this is the last season that Oklahoma and Texas are going to be a part of the Big 12. But it's not just that. They are adding the 4 brand new members, 3 from the American, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, and then BYU, who joins as an independent. This was a fun conference last season. We had a college football playoff national championship game participant. No, we don't have to talk about the game. And we had the winner of that conference not be that team in Kansas State and TCU, respectively, right? Tyler, what about the Big 12 in terms of realignment do you think is most important for this upcoming season? Because we'll talk about the on the field stuff next week. But in terms of realignment, what are we looking forward to for the Big 12 this year?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not expecting much of the schools that are joining, as they are going to.
Dude, I think you're being a little too. I think you're being a little too harsh. I do.
I'd probably be too harsh. Well, it really is about Texas and Oklahoma's last hurrah of going through this. Like, all eyes are going to be on them. Oklahoma's kind of run the conference. Texas has really struggled to do much of anything in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, but Tyler, have you heard? Texas is back this year. Have you heard?
I'll believe when I see it.
I will say this season, and we'll talk about it next week, but they have a more credible claim this season than in years past.
No,
I'm not saying they're back, but there's definitely more evidence. They are supporting. If I was an English teacher, I would be very proud in the improvement that Texas has made over the course of the school year, because finally they are showing their work. They are showing evidence in their arguments.
Yes. So, but basically, in regards to the Big 12's realignment, the big thing to me was that like an increase in their recruiting footprint, which is going to start with now. They've dipped into Florida now. They have a school there, dipping out west a little bit more with BYU, Cincinnati, and Houston. Houston kind of same footprint, but Cincinnati a little bit further north. It'll be good for them, I think. But I actually think for those four schools, it's a good year to join, because Texas and Oklahoma still being there puts all the focus on them and not on the new schools. So the new schools, it is going to be an adjustment period. Additionally, Cincinnati has got a new head coach. Houston, is Dana Holgorsen still at Houston? I lose track of that all the time.
Dana Holgorsen is still at Houston. He is in his 5th season.
And yeah, so I think it'll be a good transition year. This is a transitional year, and luckily for those four teams, I think that if they have bad seasons, it's going to be overshadowed by the fact that all eyes are going to be on Oklahoma and Texas. It's going to be all about all these Big 12 teams trying to get their last shot in at those.
I think, yeah, I agree with you completely. I also, like, from a nerdy college football history person that I am, this is the most Southwest Conference iteration of the Big 12 since the dissolution of the Southwest Conference. So for those that don't know, there was a conference by the name of the Big 8, and it included, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas, those schools in that type area. And then there was also the Southwest Conference, which was literally every Texas school that from the 20th century. I'm not talking the UTSAs, the UTEPs, the North Texases. Those came up a little bit later. Those weren't in there. But, your TCUs, your SMUs, your Baylors, your Texas Tech, those kind of schools, that was the Southwest Conference. And then 4 of those schools, Texas, Texas A&M, Texas A&M, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, and I believe Baylor were the 4 teams that basically were parachuted into the Big 8 to form the Big 12. And that essentially killed off the Southwest Conference as we know it. Those other schools, it's basically what we're seeing with the Pac-12 now. Not to get too grim, but it's the most Southwest Conference that we have. And this is going to be like a time capsule year for me with the Big 12. I'm excited for the Pac-12 schools.
Year. It's a very special
year. Just like I'm excited for the Pac-12 schools to just put their middle fingers up to the rest of college football and have incredible seasons and be very competitive and fun to watch. I'm very excited for the Big 12 to just be this like, hey, remember that one year where we had like that crazy Big 12 conference that had like Oklahoma, Cincinnati, UCF, TCU? It was crazy. It was odd. Like, I'm so excited for this. Like, I'm really, really, really pumped for this. I would be remiss to mention the Big 12, Tyler, if I didn't say that next year we're swapping out Oklahoma and Texas, and we are adding Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah.
The big
Deion Sanders is going to be back recruiting in the heart of Texas much more frequently. I'm sure he does that now because there's players in Texas. But now he can be like, hey, you can go and see your kid play at Baylor, at TCU, at Texas Tech, all these in the state of Texas, and you can go and see them. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I do think for those 4 schools, It's weird. I don't think that it's an improvement for Utah.
How so?
Well, I feel like Utah. It's one of those things where like Utah has figured out an identity in the Pac-12 that not that identity won't work in the Big 12, but I don't know. It just felt like Utah could be a big swinger in the Pac-12 more than I feel like it can be in this Big 16. But again, Oklahoma and Texas are not a part of the equation anymore. So
Right. And when they join, it'll actually be a Big 12. It'll be 12 teams because they're at 14 now, and then they're losing to. Oh no, I lied.
Yeah, it'll be a Big 16. It'll be a Big 16.
This realignment stuff is happening so quickly that
I'm losing track. Like
2 weeks ago, they would have actually been a Big 12, but now that they're adding the other ones, they're a Big 16. Which, by the way, in terms of conference commissioners that are doing a really good job right now, shout out to the Big 12 commissioner whose name is escaping me right now, and Big 12 podcasting. We are always prepared. Brett Yormark. So shout out to him. He's doing a great job in terms of.
It's I think it's like they lost their 2 big hitters, and they're like, well, we're gonna diversify our portfolio. We're gonna which is one of those things. I will say they do. I actually would give the Big 16. I mean, I'm calling them the Big 16 now. I'll give the Big 16 props. They are kind of sticking to a regional, like a little bit of a regional footprint, a little bit. I guess that's not true.
The Arizona schools, the Four Corner schools, with the exception of New Mexico. For those that don't know, that's Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. Those are the 4 corners. They share one border. I don't know. I think the SEC is still first of all, the Sun Belt is still the most in that sense. But if we're gonna go we can't even use Power 5 and Group of 5 now anymore. We can't even use those terms.
Here's the thing. What I mean is that it's better than whatever we're about to talk about them, but it's better than what the Big 10 has going on. Where I'm like,
that is a fact. That is a fact, Tyler.
Like the only one who truly does not feel like they belong in this whole situation to me, honestly, is Cincinnati.
I thought you were gonna say the Mormons.
No, weirdly, I feel like the Mormons fit.
It was a joke. It was a joke. Well, we get the Holy War as a conference game. I'm pumped.
There we go. So
that I'm pumped about. Who says regional rivalries aren't going to survive in this new world?
So that was the thing. I was like, I think of these conferences, the only one who is making sure that this was not a priority for the people that made these decisions. I know it, but what ended up happening is that I think for the Big 16. Regional rivalries were not only some were preserved and some were reignited.
Yeah, definitely.
BYU, Utah being a conference game, Holy War being a conference game, that's huge. That's a reignition of that rivalry. It's already huge, but now it has more stakes.
Well, now it can be played on rivalry week. Now the conference can say, we want this to be one of our marquee rivalry games.
And that's great. That's going to be awesome. And then Arizona State sticking around. Most of the Texas rivalries getting to stay. UCF has a bit of an unspoken rivalry with Cincinnati, and that's going to get to be preserved. So I like this I like what this conference is going to look like. Honestly, I think it'll be fun.
I think
the weird thing is that in the Big 12, it was always there are plenty of amazing schools, and TCU got into the college football playoff before Texas, and I'll never let them forget it. But it did always feel like Texas and Oklahoma didn't necessarily belong with everyone else in this conference.
In terms of helmets, yeah, I agree. Yeah. In terms of helmets, I agree. But
that's what I'm talking about. The brand, the helmet.
I can see that. Listen, I love. I'm taking 2 things from this section of the pod right now of this episode. I agree with you. I think that coming out of all of this chaos, the Big 12 might feel the most like a conference. The SEC still feels like a conference because.
But the SEC has been pretty much unaffected by this. We've known that Oklahoma and Texas are going to be joining them for a long time now.
And it's a big rivalry that's coming together. So it's not just that the SEC is getting one or the other. Right.
It's getting Texas A&M back.
That's a big deal.
It has rivalries with those schools. So is
Missouri. Oklahoma, Arkansas. Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah, but the SEC, the ACC has been the most unaffected by in the physical makeup of the conference by all of this. But
Yeah.
the SEC doesn't feel as effective because one, we've known about those things, and it was kind of all, they're a package deal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I also love that. Can we do this now? Episode 1, Season 7. From this point forward, the Big 12 will be referred to as the Big 16 on Sideline
Big
Judgment
16,
Podcast?
yes.
Okay.
I don't care until they officially rebrand. I don't
Okay.
even care. Big
Well,
16.
we have to, Tyler, we have to address the board of directors, the 2-man board of directors. I will present it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous votes. Wonderful. Love to see it. Let's move on to another conference whose name does not match up the amount of schools that they have. The Big Ten, Tyler. We've already talked about the Los Angeles schools joining the Big Ten. They're going to be joining after this coming season. They'll join for 2024. But more recently, and by recently I mean within the last month or so, as we record on Wednesday, August 16th, Oregon and Washington are also joining as well. So they will be joining not after this season. They'll be in there for the 2024 season. I think, given all things considered, Tyler, I know that you did not have a vote to want to live in a Big Ten town. You moved there with the assumption that it was a Pac-12 town, but you and all the other Angelinos were not consulted. I apologize. But the reality is that you are now in a Big Ten town. And I think that it is now, given the situation that we're at, it's like, all right, this is the new reality. How can we improve this? I think adding 2 more West Coast schools, specifically the 2 biggest other brands not named, not residing in Los Angeles within the Pac-12, was the right move to make. Because I mentioned earlier this conversation about travel, this conversation about non-football sports, about student athletes and such. While it's still not ideal and still not something I like, I do think that it eases the burden just a little bit, because the East Coast teams can now head on over to the West Coast and have an extended West Coast trip. So they kind of like get them all out at the same time. And those West Coast teams can do the exact same thing. They can go over, they don't have to play as many games, and they'll come all the way back. This is now a conference, Tyler, that in 2024 will literally employ Rutgers and Los Angeles, New Jersey, and LA is where this conference spans.
Look, I have always said, if you got a chance to take the USC Trojans on the road to go play in Rutgers, New Jersey, you got to do it. Like, you just got to make it happen. Yeah. If you got a chance to do an 18-team conference, you just got to make it happen. It actually like gives me anxiety to have.
That's too many. 16, which is what the Big 16 and the SEC will have going forward, starting in 2024. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with 18. You got to be kidding me, dude. That's way too many teams.
We can't be doing that. Like,
in 18, and one of those is Rutgers. Get out of here. Get out of here. You mean to tell me you couldn't swap Rutgers out for Iowa State so we could at least preserve that rivalry? Because Iowa State's in the Big 16. Like, the Cyhawk is still going to be played in like the second week of the year when neither team is who they should be in terms of performance. Like, the most underrated.
Ridiculous.
I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, talking about the Big Ten, I agree with you in those sentiments, Tyler. What about? I was gonna ask you as a joke, like, do you think they're gonna keep expanding? But
where can they go? Like,
Hawaii? I mean, Hawaii. I don't know, man.
Well, all jokes aside, I'm pretty sure that FSU and Clemson are going to be interested in joining in the future.
I'm sure FSU and Clemson are interested in joining the Big Ten. I don't know if the Big Ten is keen on bringing them in at least this soon. Especially, we'll get to the ACC in a second, but I don't have much else to say because this is one of those conferences that everything else is staying the same. They're just adding those 4 teams. They're literally like no one left. Everyone's there. And they're just adding it, and they are the richest conference in college football now. Their television deal is worth the most money. Each school will be getting the most money from their television deal, and that is the reason why the LA schools, Oregon and Washington, left for that TV money.
Yeah, that TV money is insane. It's nothing to sneeze at. Nothing to sneeze at all.
Yeah. Listen, Caleb Williams won the Heisman, but can he do it on a cold, snowy day at Minnesota in the outdoors?
Well, he won't have to.
That's true. That's true.
So, yeah.
Okay. Anything you want to say about the Big Ten wise? I don't think there's much to say, just because like
there isn't. They're adding
yeah.
those teams. We kind of covered it with them leaving the Pac-12.
Mhm.
I will be honest. It's like USC and UCLA felt so out of place, and now that they have Oregon and Washington, it feels more cohesive.
Well, I
But
still think they feel out of place. They just have a
they
couple
do.
buddies with them.
But like it's it's weird. 2 people feeling out of place is noticeable. 4, well, at least they have each other.
That's true. All right, I'll give you that.
But
I'll definitely
still,
give you that.
18 teams makes my blood boil. Like,
Yeah,
how did this happen?
That is simply too many teams.
It's just a division of college football. It's not even
Just
like
literally.
like,
oh my god. All right. Well, another conference that is we're not going to talk about too much is a conference that I want to say we call home, but I also want to remain unbiased. But this is the conference that we know the best because our beloved Florida Gators are in this conference, and that is the Southeastern Conference, the SEC. The football members for 2023 will stay the same as they have been, the 14 teams that we know and love. And then in 2024, like we said, Oklahoma, Texas are joining. I don't really think we need to talk much about this realignment wise. Football wise, we'll have a conversation about this conference next week. I do want to say, I have not heard, and if I missed something this summer, Tyler, please interject and let me know. But I still don't think we have like a schedule as to how these teams are going to be organized when Oklahoma and Texas join in 2024.
There's still nothing official. It's all just rumors. I've seen projections and things of like the pods, but like nothing official has happened. Which is
I want to emphasize that we here on Sideline Judgment are strong advocates of the pod system.
Oh yeah,
we believe
big
4
pods right here. Big pods.
Yep, big pod fans. 4 teams to a pod. You play your 3 pod teams every single year, and then you play 2 other pods. 4 and you play. What would it be? How do we do it? No, I can't just said like, oh, we're big fans of pods, and I can't even explain the pods.
You play the 3 teams in your pod every year, no matter what, and then you rotate basically with the rest. The numbers change depending on how many teams are in the conference, but basically the system would allow you to have visited every single stadium once in a 4-year period.
Right. Yes. And to have played every team twice in a 4-year period.
Yes. And which I'm a big advocate of, because this is the thing that I like. Georgia still never played at Texas A&M. And that's insane.
Which is crazy.
Florida's done it like 4 times. That's insane to me. Like,
absurd. I agree. Last question before we move on to the ACC, which we're going to need a little bit of time to discuss. Who do you think complains about having to play each other first, Texas or Texas A&M?
I think Texas because I don't know.
Because Texas?
I think Texas because Texas, but also like I don't know. As much as
to be fair, you could also say Texas A&M.
Jimbo Fisher doesn't really complain about that kind of stuff so much.
Oh, really? Really? Jimbo Fisher doesn't complain much? Really?
I guess that's... I think he would complain less than Steve Sarkisian would.
I do believe that. I also want to say...
It's not about him complaining much or little. It's about it comparatively, you know?
Uh-huh.
I will
say...
would get a little bit more upset.
Yes. I will say that one of the great things about Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC is that in this world where the NFL is infringing upon Thanksgiving Day weekend with a Black Friday game that, yes, I know my Dolphins are playing in, but I don't want to talk about that. And yes, it's the Jets, so I have to watch it, but I'm also like going to be very vocal about not wanting to, but I will anyway. So like, don't hold this against me. I've said multiple times on this podcast, I do not choose to be a Dolphins fan. I simply am one. Okay.
I don't choose to be a Jaguars fan, and I simply am one.
All right.
As well,
anyway, my point being, in this world where the NFL is infringing upon rivalry weekend and Thanksgiving Day weekend, the return of another massive rivalry game in the SEC in Texas and Texas A&M is going to do wonders. And I cannot wait for the day where instead of having to be subjugated to the war crime that is watching the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys every year on my favorite holiday, I can now half-heartedly keep an eye on the fantasy players that are involved in that day for me, and then watch Texas and Texas A&M in the afternoon before watching the greatest college football rivalry of all time, the Egg Bowl at night. Can't wait to have 2 marquee rivalry games in the SEC on Thanksgiving Day, and I can just anger every single one of my relatives who says, why are we watching this garbage? To which I will respond, stop talking to me. This is the greatest moment. This is my favorite day of the year, and this is 40% of why this is the best day of the year.
You will not ruin this for me.
You will not ruin this for me. In a world where our beloved, what's the rivalry game that Missouri plays? Who do they play on?
Oh, the Battle Line Trophy?
Yeah. Who do they play? It's Missouri and Arkansas. In a world where Missouri and Arkansas are being subjugated to abuse by the NFL's infringing on their territory on Black Friday, I get to at least get Texas A&M. And honestly, it's just one of those games where I hope they both lose, but whatever. Anyway, moving forward, the Atlantic Coast Conference, which, once again, commissioners, if you're going to expand to like an absurd amount of teams, or you have ambitions of expanding to an absurd amount of teams, maybe don't tie your identity to a geography. I'm just saying, guys, because the Atlantic Coast Conference has discussed adding Stanford and Cal. The last time I checked, Tyler, while Stanford and Cal do have an ocean that they reside upon, it is not the Atlantic Ocean as to which this conference is being named.
Pretty far from it, actually.
Pretty far, I would say. Now, I will say that there are no plans to expand or contract as of right now per the ACC, but they have discussed adding Stanford and Cal. Now, the reason that they have not actually brought those teams in and kind of given them a life raft is because in order to induct a new team into the ACC bylaws state that you need 12 of 15 current members to approve the addition of a new member. But Sergio, there's only 14 teams in that conference. Yes, you're correct. I personally don't acknowledge Notre Dame, but apparently the bylaws say that they are a full voting member, even though that they choose to not participate in a conference in football.
It's infuriating that they get all the good stuff and none of the bad.
I don't know what grinds my gears more, the fact that they are a full voting member in the ACC despite not participating in the largest revenue sport in the conference, or the fact that the athletic director for Notre Dame literally has a seat at the college football playoff committee. It is the conference commissioners and the Notre Dame AD. Like, the definition of being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple. I swear, seriously, it's insane. Anyway, so they need 12 of 15. Notre Dame ran over for now because it's going to come back. For the rest of my life, it's going to come back until they join a conference. And then when they join a conference, I'm going to make fun of them for not joining a conference until I die. My grandkids are going to make fun of them because they know that it makes me happy. Anyway, so 12 of the 15 schools need to approve. Tyler is losing himself over there. You missed this. We've been gone for months.
So good.
We've been gone for months. I had to get it out. Come on, man. You know me.
It feels so good.
I can't just throw it onto them during the season. I gotta get it out now and then space it out. Anyway. So Nicole Auerbach at The Athletic reported that Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and NC State voted no on adding Stanford and Cal, and that those votes are not expected to change anytime soon. Notre Dame is the school that is pushing for their inclusion. They were quoted, I forget where, and I didn't write it down, so my apologies for not being a full-fledged journalist, just kind of like a half journalist. But apparently Notre Dame was saying that they think that it isn't right that two of the most prestigious academic institutions in the country, which Stanford and the University of California at Berkeley are, that them not being included in one of the major athletic conferences isn't right. And honestly, that's the definition to me of the worst person just made a good point, because I kind of agree with that.
Oh, I fully agree with it.
I fully agree with that.
But I love, my thing is that I love that Notre Dame is making this argument, because the whole, I hate when people are like, well, Notre Dame's a hard school to get into. And I'm like, no, not like Stanford.
It's not Stanford and Cal.
But
it's not Stanford. It is a hard school to get into.
Stanford's notorious of they have to get the kid into Stanford before they can offer him a scholarship.
Literally, yes.
It's just Florida has high academic standards, but it doesn't apply to athletes the same way that it does to normal students. Let's be real here.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Notre Dame. If you're big enough of a 5-star, they're stricter about certain things on campus, but don't give me that.
Come on. They made Rudy. The propaganda machine is working overtime. All right? In where are they? In Indiana? South Bend.
South Bend, Indiana, which apparently is a real place.
Allegedly. So
I'm not convinced that the entire state of Indiana exists. I think it's all just one big basketball
Careful. If you say that loud enough, Larry Bird appears to punch you.
Well,
but the Larry Bird the guy that plays Larry Bird as a character in Winning Time, that's the Larry Bird that shows up.
Do you know that I almost got offered to be a photo double for him?
I knew that. I wasn't sure if I was able to say that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
They told me I was not tall enough.
You were not tall enough?
I'm not tall enough.
You're literally the tallest person I know.
I am 6'5", listeners, and I was not tall enough to play Larry Bird's photo double, which I told the person who was asking me, I was like, I am not great at basketball. It's very fun to play, but I missed it. I missed like the elementary school did not have a basketball court, like no team, not just a team. We didn't have a court. Didn't have one in my like nobody that I knew growing up really taught me, so I'm not very good at it. But I was like, I will like be glued to the pickup courts for like a week, for like weeks if I need to. I wanted that job so bad.
I'll fly out there and rebound for you. Like,
oh yeah,
I'll help you out.
I was so excited, and they're like, "Yeah, you're not tall enough." And I'm like, "Is this what it feels like?" I've never had that feeling before. Anyway,
sorry, ladies, he's taken. Anyway, so I mentioned that because those 4 schools that voted no on Stanford and Cal are not going to change anytime soon. And that's because 2 of those schools are Florida State and Clemson. Now, Florida State and Clemson have been unhappy with the way that the ACC distributes their revenue. It's important to note that they became unhappy with the way the ACC distributes their revenue after the news that Oregon and Washington and UCLA, that basically the Pac-12 was dissolving and going in all different directions. And all these schools were getting all this money, and FSU and Clemson were like, well, we're the 2 biggest schools in this conference. What's the deal going on here? So much so that at the beginning of August, Tyler, FSU president Rick McCullough, I'm so sorry if I pronounced your name wrong.
I don't know.
Rick, our boy Rick, or FSU's boy Rick, the president told the board of trustees that FSU would consider leaving the ACC unless there is, quote, a radical change to the revenue distribution, unquote. That is per the Associated Press. Now, Clemson, while they pretty much agree with that statement, have been much quieter publicly. They have not come out and said things. They have not been very vocal. And that's because they're very aware that the ACC's TV deal with ESPN, that, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, includes the ACC network, that will last through the 2036 season. So the reason the Pac-12 schools are leaving and can do that after the 2024 season is because their grant of rights expires. When you join a conference, you sign a piece of paper that says, I give you the conference, I grant you my television rights so you can negotiate on behalf of us to get us a bigger deal and split it amongst the conference members, kind of like a union. Take notes, college football players. So because they know that the deal is through 2036, in order for them to leave the conference, I don't even know the exact number. I just wrote down here in my notes, it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Too much is what it would cost.
Way too much. We're talking over a decade. Let's say this lasts 2 or 3 years. It would still be over a decade. We get to 2025. It would still be 11 years before they could leave free of charge. Now, Oklahoma and Texas negotiated a deal, and I believe both schools paid somewhere between $60 and $80 million to get out of their Big 12 contracts early. But I believe the Big 12 deal at the time expired in 2025 or 2026. So it was much closer.
It's not even in the same ballpark.
Not even remotely close. Like this is insanity what FSU and Clemson think they get. Like Clemson and FSU are not leaving the ACC before 2030. Let's be full stop. Like they are in this for the next decade unless
I only bring this up because the jokes on Twitter were hilarious. Unless FSU gets that Saudi money that they were talking about. So,
well, I mean, if they don't spend it all on international soccer players, because Neymar just got like $500 million or whatever it was, they offered Mbappe at $750 million. Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Different podcast.
This is one of those things where being a college football fan and on Twitter is like this fever dream where I couldn't explain to everyone else what was so funny when I started seeing all these memes of like Florida State connected to like Saudi Arabian like imagery,
Uh-huh.
and and I have a lot of friends who went to FSU, and they were all making jokes about it in all of
Of
our group
course.
chats. I was just like, it's so funny, and I can't tell anyone this because it would take too long to explain. And then at the end, they'd be like, "That was why."
And on top of that, I know we're joking here, but FSU literally hired a private equity firm from New York to try and see what they could do to get into like the venture capital market to raise the money to pay for the thing, which is crazy. I don't know how that works because they're a state school. I know that if Miami wanted to do that, they could go to whoever they want and get however much money they want from anyone because they're a private school. They're not bound by any state law or whatever. I don't know if FSU can do that because they are a state school. So
Yeah,
we'll see how that goes. And so yeah, listen, the gap revenue between the ACC and what I'm calling the Big Two, the SEC and the Big Ten, because let's be realistic, those are the conferences and those are the payouts that FSU and Clemson are looking at and comparing to. There's going to be a difference of like over $30 million annually for the next 15 years, or for the next, what are we in 23, next 12, 13 years.
damn.
Yeah. So I understand why Florida State and Clemson are kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? We need to kind of make a move. But also it's like, you're priced out, dude. Like there's no way you can pay hundreds of $1 million to get out of that. Like, especially Florida State, who it's been well documented. There was a fantastic ESPN long form article. I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, I think at the beginning of, or right at the end of the Taggart era, I believe, like maybe the season he got fired. So now we're looking at what, 3, maybe 4 years ago.
Not in a good financial situation.
No, talking about how Jimbo, just not Jimbo himself, but like the Jimbo era, wasn't kind of handled well financially from an administrative standpoint, from an athletic department standpoint, and they were raking, like bleeding money. And so it's kind of curious that they're the ones kind of spearheading this in that sense. So all that to say, listen, the football members for 2023 remain unchanged. Everything in the ACC is staying pat in terms of conference members. I will say, because I'm not legally obligated, but I think I'm morally for myself obligated to say that if Notre Dame decides to join a conference, I believe the ACC has the first right of refusal. So damn well they're going to pick them up. There's a lot of rumors that for a split second there was a moment where I think like there was a rumor on Twitter that the Big Ten only wanted Oregon and didn't want Washington. And like the rumor, like supporting that rumor, quote unquote, was that they were in secret talks with Notre Dame, because Notre Dame feels like a Big Ten school. Yeah. But then again, what is a school feeling like a certain conference? What does that mean anymore?
That used to mean something. It doesn't anymore.
Yeah. Come on. Oregon and Washington feel Pac-12, and they will for the rest of their life.
Dead.
No, don't say that. I hate that, man. Oh, so sad.
You gotta accept it. Accept
it. I will accept it, but I don't think I'll like it. You know what I mean?
No, you do not have to like it. I certainly don't.
All right, Tyler, those are the Power 5 conferences as we know them today. That terminology is definitely going to change in the next couple of years. Let's look at the group of 5 teams and see conferences and see how their realignment shook up.
Not as dramatic, but
definitely something. When these top conferences make their changes, there is a trickle-down effect that goes down all levels of college football. And it goes all the way down to the FCS, which I'll bring up towards the end. The American, we mentioned that Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF have left from last year. And so for this season, in 2023, Charlotte, FAU, go Owls, North Texas, Rice, UAB, and UTSA, meep, are joining the American Conference from Conference USA. So the American Conference members for this season and going forward, because they're not expected to have any changes in affiliation, are East Carolina, Memphis, Navy, SMU, Temple, Tulane, Tulsa, USF, Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UAB, and UTSA. That is a 14-team league, up from 11 from last season. They lose the 3 to go down to 8, and then they add the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to go up to 14. There were 11 because UConn got out of their American deal early to become an independent, because they joined the Big East because they are a basketball school, and they wanted to join those Big East schools that are just basketball, and then they're independent in football. That's why there was 11 in UConn, or in the American, the past few years. That is the new look American. There is conversations, Tyler, of what is going to be the best group of 5 conference, and the kind of contenders are the American and the Sun Belt. We'll get to the Sun Belt a little bit later. But I want to ask you before we move on to our next conference, what do you think of this new look American? And yeah, the big heavy hitters, the Cincy, Houston, and UCF are gone, but I think they filled it out in a very very consistent middle of the pack way. You know what I mean?
It felt like promotion and relegation situation, where all the teams that they promoted that got promoted to the American, which is
Deserved it.
Deserved it. I mean, it feels like a Conference USA roster because it was, but it does feel like of the many teams that could have been picked, they picked ones that have been recently good, have infrastructure to continue to be good, and now with better resources in the American, and they all kind of fit the footprint. So I like it.
This conference is going to be,
except for Rice. Rice is bad, but
yeah, but Rice gives them
Rice,
South
yeah,
Texas.
Rice, yeah. So again, recruiting footprint is a part of this. And,
yes, I agree.
Yeah,
I think that this conference is this conference isn't going to have your they have the potential of having the 1 or 2 teams that are whoa, really, really good. But I think it's going to be, for the most part, middle of the pack. It's just good football. I think you will enjoy watching the American. East Carolina is a good football team. Memphis, we've seen them be good in the past and be one of those top G5 teams. SMU is a good program. Tulane, we don't have to talk about Tulane. We already know how good Tulane is. FAU has...
Let's talk about Owls.
Well, we'll talk about them next week when we do our previews.
Yeah.
But they are quickly establishing themselves, and I think that this take is unbiased. Obviously, I am biased, but I do believe this take to be a bit unbiased. They're establishing themselves as the if you want to do a coaching rehab, and you want to prove yourself.
It's their situation. That's their whole thing.
And what better place to do that than in South Florida and Boca? And now you get to play in. They're no longer in Conference USA. They're in the American. They're in, if not the best group of 5 conference, then at worst, the second best. At worst.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So Tom Herman, I'm excited to see what he does there. North Texas has the infrastructure. Everyone talks about North Texas as the infrastructure. And UTSA, the Roadrunners they're good football team, man. They're doing really good stuff with Jeff Traylor.
It felt like this, again, it feels like a Conference USA roster because it was.
Mm-hmm.
But if all these schools minus Rice, but most of them have the infrastructure or have a value to the conference. So I think it makes sense.
And then some hired Trent Dilfer as their head coach. But we'll talk about that next week. Conference USA. We mentioned how they, were kind of rated. This, to me, is the worst of all the FBS conferences now. Okay. The members that left, just mentioned, Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UAB, UTSA. They all left for the American to replace those American schools that left. And then they kind of backfilled it, right? They backfilled it.
Yeah, it's not great.
It's not looking good. The new conference is now FIU, Louisiana Tech, MTSU, Middle Tennessee, UTEP, Western Kentucky. Those are the old Conference USA schools. And now the new adds are Jacksonville State, which is in Alabama. Liberty, which okay.
Ooh.
I heard on Split Zone Duo they're gonna call them the Libs, and I thought that was the funniest thing I've ever heard.
So good.
I think we need to appropriate that and take it. We need to steal that.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase that. I don't want to steal it because I love Split Zone Duo. That is a great podcast.
In there.
We need to join them in that. I think I agree. We're gonna call them the Libs.
They get the credit, but they're the Libs.
Exactly. And then New Mexico State and Sam Houston, who are coming up from FCS. So, and then those 9 teams will play in 2023, and in 2024, Kennesaw State will come up from FCS, which gives them Atlanta technically, because Kennesaw State's in Atlanta. Technically, they now have a footprint in Atlanta, but it's okay, guys, you know what I mean? Yeah. So there you are. So that's Conference USA. Not much to talk about there. I will say, selfishly as a fan, and I'll say this again next week when we preview Conference USA and the American, I want to pour one out for the Shula Bowl, the FAU rivalry game. Pour one out for my game. Anyway.
It was so interesting,
Yeah, I know.
That's a compliment.
Stop it. Oh. It was. I used to go to those games all the time. It was awesome. Great time.
No, I get it.
Love the rivalry. And there's a real hatred there. Anyway, we're going to...
I know.
Mountain West. Nothing has changed as of yet. but this is one of the more interesting conferences in college football right now because everyone's waiting to see what happens to the quote-unquote Pac-4. Everything's on the table, right? This conference is staying this as of this year, 2023, and as of right now, it's staying the same. Air Force, Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, Hawaii, Nevada, New Mexico, San Diego State, San Jose State, UNLV, Utah State, Wyoming. That's the conference right now. Are those 4 teams that were kind of left behind in the Pac-12 going to move and join with them? Is there a merger that happens? They could combine themselves, but also like keep the Pac-12 name. TV deals, what happens there? If they do that, do they take 1 or 2? Does the Pac-12 themselves backfill from them? I don't know. We don't know what happens, and it's not worth talking because like it's so up in the air right now. We have no idea what's going to happen with them. As of now, that's the conference. We'll see what happens.
It's nice to see there's only like two-ish conferences that are like this. It's nice to see a conference where nothing's changed.
Literally, right? Well, this one is one of those nothing's
gonna
change.
I think.
I think it will, but then again, I think they're going to add. You want to know my real take?
Yes.
I think they're going to add Oregon State and Washington State, and they're going to keep the Pac-12 branding. They're going to like absorb the Pac-12 name, so it'll live on. The name will live on, and they'll abandon the Mountain West name. Kind of like how when the Big East fell, and the new Big East is the American, essentially. Yeah. I think that's what's going to happen there.
It would make sense. I mean,
and then I think Stanford and Cal are going to go elsewhere. Now, if you ask Raul, my stepdad, they're going to go to the American, which would be a great grab by the American, by the way. And I'm kind of rooting for that. I think it would be really fun to see them in the American. I think given the ACC's unwillingness and Florida State and Clemson's unwillingness to adapt is the best way I can put it, I guess, with their voting on bringing them in because it would lower their annual revenue. I think that's the most likely thing. And then maybe when in 10 years or in 7 or 8 years when FSU and Clemson inevitably go elsewhere and, because we know this is just going to keep happening, then maybe Stanford and Cal kind of go into the ACC to replace them. But as of now, I think that's kind of what's going to happen. They need somewhere to play next year. They need to go somewhere.
Yeah.
You cannot have a conference with 4 teams. Full stop. You need at least 8. You need it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's the Mountain West. The Sun Belt. The Sun Belt kind of already had their realignment situation happen, which is kind of what I love about it, that they quietly not kicked it off, but they quietly had their first realignment year last year. They added James Madison, Marshall, Old Dominion, and Southern Miss. No further plans to expand as of now. Your conference is App State, Arkansas State, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, James Madison, Louisiana, Marshall, Old Dominion, South Alabama, Southern Miss, Texas State, Troy, and Louisiana Monroe. So a 14-team conference, all within a relatively condensed local geographical area. And if you are like Tyler and I, who are going to miss that regionality and are going to miss that, the Sun Belt is the conference for you.
Yep.
I am so excited to watch the Sun Belt seriously for the rest of my life because I think this is gonna be the true spirit of college football for those of us who are like, oh, that's what I always wanted it to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hope so.
So yeah, I'm excited for that. And then JMU, unfortunately, are still not bowl eligible because they need 2 years. They won the conference last year, just not on paper. They were number 1. Just not on paper because they moved up from FCS and they dominated.
It's never made sense to me as a rule that it's just like,
I get the rule because it's to protect schools from themselves from coming up too quickly. I get it. But when you're at James Madison's level, you should be they applied for a waiver. It was just denied. Like if I'm the person gets that waiver across my desk, I look at JMU and I go, oh, I don't need to read this. Approve. You're good.
Yeah.
So. And we end, Tyler, because of course we do. We end with the MAC, who are the same.
It's so perfect.
Because MAC.
Again, all the MAC teams are the same, and their conference remains exactly the way it was.
nor will any team leave, nor will any team join. For a split second, there was a moment where Western Kentucky flirted with leaving Conference USA and joining the MAC, and I think the MAC was like, "We're good."
Mac is the epitome of I don't like change.
Mac loves to come home, have his beers, and watch his ball. That's Mac.
Yeah.
And you know what? I love him for that.
We could all learn something from Mac.
We can. We can all learn something
Mac a lot, but we could all learn something here.
Exactly. Tyler, that concludes the Collegiate Gerrymandering episode of Sideline Judgement, the debut episode of season 7. We'll be back next week to preview every single conference. We promise within an hour 15. We will preview them all. We will talk about them. Tyler and I will have what we hope is a brief conversation about our beloved Billy Napier and the naming of Graham. Graham.
I mean, it was what was going to happen.
The naming of Graham Mertz as our quarterback.
I'm still holding out a hope for a transfer.
You know, I'm.
It was like a month. It was like a month straight where I was like, we were like, we can get a transfer, and I'm like, it's August.
Yeah, I don't know about that, Tyler. I will say our best bet is to hope that we get the Graham Mertz from the first 4 games of the 2020 Wisconsin season. If we can get that Graham Mertz, I'm in, because the rest of this team is actually pretty good. The rest of this team is really good.
I was talking about my dad today. I was talking to my dad today, and I literally said, it was just like, I don't know why, but I have a weirdly good feeling about the season, only in that, okay, I will, this is as brief as I will keep it. Not that I think this team is going to win the SEC East, which is going away after this year, so last chance, best chance. But it is that it's like, yeah, the quarterback situation is like a glaring question mark, and like a question mark with a sad face at the bottom of it at the point, because it's like it can only go from okay to good to bad is the way we see it. But the rest of this team I really kind of like. So
listen, this team,
like, I think we might be better than people will give it credit. Now, friend of the pod, Dede, has stated to me that anyone who tries to watch more than 2 games of Florida Gator football this year is actively trying to get cancer.
Dede also reminds all of us, and by us I mean my group chat that I'm with Dede, unprompted, probably once a week, that he's not a Falcons fan. Which, you might be a Falcons fan if you're saying that once a week. I'm just saying. Yeah. I'm just saying on that. Also, Dede is not the person to, I love you, Dede, but not the person to talk to about college football things, because that man has said to my face multiple times, and I quote, if you're not in the SEC, you're irrelevant. So
yeah,
I don't know if quoting Dede on our college football podcast.
Was Dede responsible for conference realignment? Seems like
no. You know why I know he's not? Because what he would have done was he would have kicked out the Mississippi schools. He would have kicked out Missouri and Arkansas, and he would have just added Ohio State. I don't even think he would have added Michigan. He would have been like, nah, they're too garbage.
Yeah, he only would have added Ohio State and Clemson.
Ohio State, Clemson, probably Texas for the oil money. He would have taken USC for the extracurricular Los Angeles activities. Is the best way and most appropriate way I can put that. That's what he would have done. He would have done that, and then he would have sent the Falcons down to the SEC. That's what he would have done. He would have done that, because of course he's not a Falcons fan. So why would he want them in the NFL? All of that, Tyler, and more next week when we preview the 2023 college football season. I am excited that we're back. I am pumped that we get to do this weekly, and I cannot wait for college football season. I've been reading the Athlon. I'm having fun.
Boy,
it's been
I
good.
Just got it. I'm going to be reading it. I'm very excited.
It's been good. All right, Tyler, anything else you want to say before we wrap this episode up?
No, but it is good to be back. I'm excited for another. It's coming up on us fast. I'm excited for another season of college football. I mean, when you live here in Los Angeles, it kind of sneaks up on you a little bit. Just football in general sneaks up on you a little bit more than you thought, because like just people around here don't talk about it as much unless you bring it up. And
Dude, it sneaks up on me, and I live in South Florida, dude. All right,
good
man.
point.
There's life. It's crazy. The difference between being like an adult and being a college kid with college football is that, like, when I was in college, I would start like researching college football stuff in like June. I'd be like, all right, I'm ready for this to be back. Like, I'm reading, I'm watching old tape, I'm looking on the message, I'm doing all that stuff. And now it's like I'm so busy that, like, last week I was like, yo, I bought that Athlon 2 weeks ago. I haven't touched it. I should probably crack this thing open and get to work.
And so it's funny. I've been I've been preparing my girlfriend to be like, hey, just so you know,
By the way,
like, remember that part of me that you only see from the months of like September to February? It's coming back.
It's coming back. Yep. Yeah, you had your fun this summer.
The weekends do not belong. They do not belong to you anymore. They belong to my teams.
They belong to University of Florida and the Jacksonville Jaguars.
I will let you know the bye weeks, so we can plan for it. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get Hannah. I'm trying to take Hannah to Jacksonville we'll go to a Jaguars game at some point this fall. But
that sounds like fun. That sounds like fun.
I
will
like,
say,
I feel like a Gator game would be a little bit too much for a woman who's never been to a any football.
That's
game,
too much.
Like, before.
That's too much. Yeah, that's too much. I will say the other last week, Alexa and I were hanging out with our friends down here, and Alexa said, I'm so excited for the fall to come back so we can have like our fun Saturdays, and we can have like, and then she listed off like, you know, like we could do the fall decorations, we can like, you know, whatever. But then she said, and I can't wait for college football to be back. And I was like, oh, I've corrupted this woman. In my head, I was like, I corrupted her. I mean, I'm pumped, but I corrupted her.
I did it.
It also helps that the Florida season opens on Thursday, August 31st at 7:30, and the UCF season opens Thursday, August 31st at 8 p.m. So our games are going to be on at the same time. So we're going to have to do some split screen action with our friends and stuff. Yeah. But it's like, you know, I'm pumped. I'm pumped because it gives me all day Saturday. Like, I don't have to worry about the Gators.
I love when the Gators have a bye week or play on which they never play on a non-Saturday day. But I love when they have a bye week just because I can sit there and be like, if I'm not doing something else, I sit there and be like, I can just watch this stuff.
Yeah.
And
it's
like,
so cool. Right, exactly. All right, we got to get out of here. This has been another episode of Sideline Judgment. My name is Sergio.
My name is Tyler.
For the 7th consecutive year, Tyler, we're not biased, but go Gators.
Go Gators.